On this worksheet, we're going to look at different types of solutions, different examples of different types of solutions. Before we get started, I just want to do a couple of definitions. So a solution we define as something that is a homogeneous mixture. A homogeneous mixture just means that when we look at the solution, the individual components of the solution are indistinguishable. So like when you look at the solution, it looks like just one uniform thing. You can't see the individual components. So for example, trail mix is not a homogeneous mixture because when you look at trail mix, you can see the peanuts, you can see the M&Ms, things like that. The other thing that I want to define is solute and solvent, because we're going to use those two terms in this. Solute and solvent are words that we use to describe the different components of the solution based on their relative quantities. So when we have a solution, the solvent is the thing that we have the most of. So this is the greater component, the part of the solution that is present in the larger amount. And the solute is the lesser component, the thing that we have the least of. And in a solution, you can only have one solvent because you just have one thing that is present in the largest quantity, but you could have multiple solutes depending on how many different things were all being mixed together. So for the first problem, we're being asked to give an example of a solution, a homogeneous mixture that is made from a solid solute in a liquid solvent. So this means that we're going to have a liquid in a large quantity. We're going to have a whole lot of a liquid, and then we're going to put in there some sort of solid substance, and that solid is going to dissolve so that when we look at it, we can't see the solid anymore. A good example of this would be salt water. As long as you don't put too much salt in the water, the salt will dissolve in the water. You'll get a homogeneous mixture. Water is the solvent, salt is the solute. And if we look at this solution, what does it look like? The saltwater solution looks like a liquid. It looks like the component that we have, the largest quantity. An example of a liquid solute in a liquid solvent. These ones are a little bit harder to come up with. Rubbing alcohol, which you might have in your medicine cabinet. Rubbing alcohol, which is also called isopropyl alcohol. This is a mixture of isopropyl alcohol, which is a liquid, in water, which is also a liquid. And this looks like a liquid. You might be wondering about, what about oil and water if you mixed oil and water together? Remember, if you mix oil and water together, they don't actually mix. They stay separated from each other, two separate layers. So that is not a homogeneous mixture. A homogeneous mixture is when the components are indistinguishable. And since you can see the water and you can see the oil, it's not a homogeneous mixture. That means this is not a solution. So this is not an example of liquid in liquid. Gas solute in liquid solvent. A good example of this would be soda or any sort of carbonated beverage. The solute in that is carbon dioxide gas, CO2, and this is going to look liquid. Now you might be thinking, wait a minute, you can see the bubbles of carbonation in soda, and that, it is true, but also sometimes you can't see the bubbles of carbonation. Like when you first open it up and it fizzes, you can see all those bubbles of carbonation, but as it settles down a little bit, that gas stays dissolved. When you don't have quite as much gas crammed into that liquid, it does become a solution. A gas solute in a gas solvent, a great example of this would be air. In air, the solvent is the component that we have the most of is nitrogen gas. That's about 78% of the air that we breathe. And then we have a lot of other gases dissolved in that N2 gas. For example, oxygen, O2. We have carbon dioxide that we exhale. And this looks like a gas. It's funny to say that because we can't see it. It doesn't really look like anything. Solid dissolved in solid. This is one that's usually pretty hard for people to think of an example. Brass is an example of a solid in a solid. It's a mixture of two metals or multiple metals. It looks like a solid. And then last but not least, gas in a solid. My favorite example of this is Pop Rocks, the candy. That's a solid, candy, sugar, whatever, and it has carbon dioxide gas dissolved in it. Another good example of a gas solute and a solid solvent is a glacier. Has air trapped in the solid ice. But Pop Rocks is more fun, and it's one that is kind of tangible, because when you eat Pop Rocks, if you have eaten Pop Rocks, when you put them in your mouth, you feel that fizzing in your mouth, and that's the gas solute escaping as the solid dissolves in your mouth.